Good evening, vampires. In tonight's story, a mysterious new student named Lucian arrives at your school, and from the moment he sits beside you, reality begins to shift. Time skips, reflections lag, and the rain seems alive. Drawn into his secret world, you discover he's a centuries-old vampire, bound by a vow, and together you navigate thresholds between danger, hunger, and choice. What begins as fear transforms into trust, love, and eternity as you step into immortality at his side. Let's begin. It started on a rainy Thursday. You were sitting by the window in your high school's history class, watching droplets snake down the glass while Mr. Patel mumbled about the fall of the Roman Empire. The projector coughed through slides, the map curled at the edges like a tired leaf. Then the door creaked open. In walked someone you'd never seen before. A student, tall, pale, with dark, unblinking eyes that seemed to scan the room like he was reading the truth behind everyone's skin. He said his name was Lucian. He didn't smile. He didn't speak unless called on. And yet, he sat next to you. From the moment he did, something strange began. The air around you cooled, your thoughts slowed, and the sound of the rain seemed to grow louder, as if the world around you was shifting, just slightly out of phase. He took notes with a fountain pen the color of old wine. The nib whispered across paper in a manner too smooth for a new student. When Mr. Patel asked for 5 causes of imperial decline, Lucian wrote 6 and crossed out none. Your pencil rolled toward the edge of your desk, paused, and rolled back as if a slope had reversed. You stared at the clock. The second hand trembled and skipped, a missed heartbeat you felt in your throat. A strand of hair crossed your cheek. Without looking, Lucian reached and caught it midair, only he didn't touch you. The hair simply settled. "Do you hear that?" you whispered. He didn't look at you. "Only when it rains." A draft slid through the room, carrying the smell of wet limestone and old books. You saw your reflection in the window, and for one blink, it lagged a fraction behind you. The bell rang. Chairs scraped. Mr. Patel gave homework you wouldn't remember. Lucian stood in one smooth motion. A page from your notebook fluttered free. He caught it between forefinger and thumb, reading the single word you'd written without knowing why. Hunger. "You'll want to keep that," he said, and handed it back. You slid the page into your pocket, the paper warm as if it had been held a long time. That afternoon, you found yourself in the old section of the school library. No one ever went there. The shelves were dusty, the carpet murmured softly when stepped on, and the radiator clicked as if practicing a code. He stood by a window holding an old leather-bound book, murmuring something in a language you didn't recognize. The air around him felt cooler, as though the room wore shade. You approached without meaning to. He looked up and for a moment, his eyes glowed, not like a trick of the light, but like something ancient had looked directly into your soul. Not bright, not theatrical, just awake. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, voice deep and smooth. "But now that you are, I suppose it's already begun." You asked him what he meant. The question fell between you and didn't quite hit the floor. He closed the book with careful hands, thumb resting on an embossed sigil at the spine. "Some places are doors," he said. "Some people are keys. Which am I?" "You're the room on the other side." He slid the book into the shelf. The title you'd seen when you blinked was not the title now. He stepped left and, in that sideways slip, disappeared. Not a vanishing act, simply a quiet refusal to be in the wrong place. You didn't scream. You didn't run. You stood with the radiator's gentle clicks, the dust motes, drifting like tiny moons. You touched the shelf where he had been and felt it warm, the way a seat remembers a person. A draft found you, the kind that knows where to go. A paper scrap lifted from the carpet and stuck to your shoe. a library card with no name, stamped 3 times in fading red. On the card, someone had written, in narrow script, "Come at midnight if the rain holds." You folded the card, placed it with hunger, and left by the side door. The hallway smelled like wet chalk. Your reflection in the trophy case arrived just behind you again, late, apologetic. That night, you couldn't sleep. The moon outside was red, full and heavy. Clouds crossed it like whispers trying not to be overheard. You lay still and counted the gaps between thunder that didn't come. At exactly midnight, a knock echoed from your window. It was Lucian. He stood on the slick roof, barefoot, rain streaming down his hair as if even water knew to move around him. He gestured for you to lift the latch. You did. The wind rushed in, bringing the scent of stone and wet leaves. "I need your help," he said, "and I need your trust." Without knowing why, you gave him both. He told you the truth. He was not human. Centuries ago, he had taken a vow never to feed on a mortal again. He spoke the vow as if it still lived between his teeth. "Something has changed," he said. "This town hums wrong." He held the library card you'd found. "You were marked before I arrived. The mark is an invitation and a bait." "Why me?" "Because you were born on a threshold," he said, "and thresholds attract what wants crossing." He led you along the rooftop ridge. From up there, the town looked like a dim constellation. Street lights flickered in a pattern your bones almost recognized. "Listen," he said. You did. Beneath the wind and the far road came a deep, steady thrum, like a heart under the town. You felt it in your tongue. The rain found a rhythm with it, then lost it again. On the street, a figure paused under a lamp. Their face was wrong in the way mirrors can be wrong. Pale eyes lifted to you and did not blink. "We have to hurry," he whispered. He showed you how night is a map, alleyways as arteries, culverts as old veins, roofs as unremembered paths. Your feet learned quickly. Your fear learned to be a passenger. "I can't feed," he said, "and I won't, but something will try to make me. That is the danger closest to us." "What do I do?" "Hold the door," he said, "and when I say now, open it." You didn't ask which door. His hand in yours was the answer. The next day, you couldn't focus. Your neck itched. Your skin prickled in sunlight. You tilted mirrors away without quite knowing why. After school, in the gym's shadowy corridor, the one that always smelled faintly of rubber. And rain? You felt the temperature fall. Lucian stepped from the shade. "I tried to resist," he said, almost apologizing. "But you were chosen." His eyes didn't beg forgiveness. They promised care. "And I intend to keep you," he added, "from the things that believe you are a door to be broken." He asked nothing else. He placed his hand on your shoulder, and the world's sound fell away as if someone had lifted the needle from the record of your day. The fluorescent lights throbbed and then steadied. Then he bit you. Not like in the movies. It wasn't violent. It was intimate, quiet, like a secret exchanged between two souls, signed in breath. Your body answered with a hush that began in the wrists and traveled inward. Your thoughts rethreaded themselves. The gym clock clicked and then stalled at 3:13. You saw the grain in the polished wood as if it were script. Your hearing reached the field outside, found a single laugh, followed it until it turned into wind. When you woke, you were on the floor. Lucian was gone. A white line of dust crossed your sleeve. The old steel door at the corridor's end had fogged a perfect oval, like a breath that didn't belong to you. Your heart beat slower, your vision sharpened. Dust motes became a galaxy. You could taste the metal in coins 3 lockers away. You stood and tested the air with your tongue. Ridiculous, except it worked. The world arrived with a clarity that wasn't power so much as precision. In the mirror's edge, your reflection glided a half moment late. When it caught up, it nodded, as if to say, "We're learning." You touched the place on your neck and found no wound, just a warmth that answered your pulse. You pulled the library card from your pocket. The red stamps had deepened. On the back, new ink, midnight, again. Bring the word from your pocket. You unfolded the word, hunger. It no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a language. Weeks passed. Lucian became your protector, your guide, your more. You walked with him in the rain, shared quiet in the library, laughed in the shadows where fluorescent light couldn't quite reach. He taught you how to move silently. Each step, a sentence with no consonants. He showed you how to see in the dark, how edges hold secrets daylight talks over. He taught you how to taste the world differently. Cold water as sugar, wool sweaters as thunderclouds, a copper penny as a summer storm held in the mouth. He never bit you again, but he didn't have to. His presence became a kind of hunger you never wished to satisfy. The good ache of an answered question you keep asking. He told you the rules of his vow. Never take, never harm. Repay every debt in a currency older than money. Keep the threshold even when no one knows there is one. You learn the signs of the other kind. The ones who hunted want the way some people hunt excuses. Their eyes were pretty because they were empty. You studied the town together. You mapped the old riverbed under the streets by how damp seeped through basement bricks. You marked 3 places that felt like doorways. The storm drain with a circle of rust, the white-painted bridge with half its letters missing, the stack room where the radiator tapped 3 times before heat. Lucian didn't tell his whole history. He handed you fragments the way tides hand shells, a lantern on a black river. A letter slid under a door in a city that now exists as a footnote, a cathedral's shadow crossing fields of snow. "I thought I was finished," he said once, sitting with you on the bleachers after a rain. The field smelled like grass trying to be air. "I shrank my life to something I could carry. Then you. Is that good?" you asked. "It is the word I have left," he said, and the rare smile moved like sunrise behind clouds. You brought him things he couldn't enter to get. A program from the school concert, a book club flyer with 3 names circled, a yearbook photo of a smilin' boy whose reflection in the glass pane didn't match his posture. These pieces lay between you like clues. You didn't need a solved case as much as you needed to notice together. One night, a pale-eyed woman watched you from a bus shelter. Lucienne stood between you and her without moving. She drifted her gaze away as if bored. Her mouth moved around the word door in a way that made your teeth ache. "Some of them," he said later, "think love is a salt lick left to trap deer. What do we think? That love is a house, one with unbreakable hinges." In the old stacks, you and he found the leather-bound book again. This time, the sigil warmed under your fingers. You opened to a page where someone had pressed a violet long ago. The words above it read, "Not all hunger is for blood. Some is for witness." He read it aloud and let the room take the echo. You learned to walk the line between thirst and choice. On nights when your skin sang with wanting, he would take your hand and guide your breath, 4 in, 6 out, until the wanting became a shape you could carry instead of a river that carried you. He never called you brave. He made you feel you always had been. One evening, rain hammered the library's eaves. The parking lot became a black mirror, lightning-stitched clouds far off. "You're still you," he said, like a reminder he needed too. "And that is the miracle." You reached for his hand. He let you have it. Your fingers learned the temperature of forever. One morning on the roof, night held its breath while dawn tested the edge. Lucian looked tired, like a secret carried too far. "You can go back," he said. "Forget this. Forget me." Or he drew a small vial from his coat, dark as garnet, bright as a promise. "My blood," he whispered. "One drop and you'll never be the same. We'll be forever." Wind lifted the last of the night. Clouds thinned. Birds held a meeting and postponed it. "And if I don't?" you asked. "I walk you back to the door," he said. "I lock it from the outside. I keep watch until a life you choose keeps you. It will hurt, then it won't." He did not plead. He did not press. He waited. "You lifted the vial." The liquid caught the low light and held it still, as if weighing it. "Will I still be me?" you asked. "You will be more of your you," he said. "The you that never had to be small." Your hands did not shake. You opened the vial, touched a fingertip, and brought it to your tongue. The world tilted a degree and settled. Colors stepped into truer shapes. Sounds balanced themselves. It wasn't power, it was clarity. A violin string tuned to the exact breath of the room. The first heartbeat after tasted like iron and rain. The second tasted like a word you'd been trying to remember since childhood. The third tasted like Lucian saying your name with no one listening but you. You leaned into him. He exhaled the breath he'd been saving since the first Thursday. Below, the town's deep thrum softened as if something that had been reaching found no purchase. "Is the danger gone?" you asked. "No," he said. "But it has to work harder now." You smiled and let the sun edge the roof without touching you. You awoke beneath the earth, not in a coffin, but in a stone chamber lit by moonlight filtering through crystal. The ceiling arched like a palm held above you. Somewhere water spoke a patient sentence to rock. Lucian stood beside you. He touched your hand, and together you stepped into the forest. Night felt warm. Stars hung low, nearer than stories suggest. Your feet found the paths animals wrote and people forgot. An owl turned the world with its gaze and decided you belonged. Time did what time often does when watched with care. Inktight it became generous, ink, and years turned like pages. The townside changed its clothes and names, so the library painted itself and then grew tired and returned to bay. Mr. Patel retired with a box of maps and a chalkboard eraser that kept a faint ghost of empires. The old gym door acquired a new handle that didn't fog. You did not age as calendars demand, but you grew. You learned the quiet math of attention, where to stand so a lost child will look, how to share warmth with a stranger without taking heat from them, how to be present enough that a sob turns into breath. Lucian taught you to hear what avoids being heard, the tense silence before a lie, the pressure drop when a threshold tests itself, the way hunger masquerades as urgency. You taught him to laugh at the right parts of bad movies. You taught him the names of cloud shapes no one uses anymore. He taught you the names stars wore before they were cataloged. On a winter night, you returned to the old stacks. The leather-bound book had waited. Inside, a new note in tidy script. There are doors. There are keys. There are rooms. Be the fourth thing. The house that keeps them safe. A century later, because centuries began to be a way you measured certain feelings, the storm drain still pulled rain toward the same altar. You placed flowers there and watched them spin, then lodge, then rest. A shadow with the wrong face watched from a distance and changed its mind. Lucian stood to your left as he had the first day, and to your right as he had every day after. When nights were easy, you walked. When nights were hard, you walked closer. You were both immortal and in love, a quiet, enduring love. You kept thresholds, and thresholds kept you. The first true test arrived on a damp spring night when the river smelled like coins. An elder came to town, older than Lucien, older than the vows, He wore a suit that had never been new and eyes that had never been young. "I've heard of your abstinence," he said to Lucian, voice like paper being folded, "and of your attachment." He meant you and did not bother to hide it. "This place has thresholds," the elder added. "I intend to tax them." Lucien did not bow. "Not here." The elder smiled with all his teeth and none of his mouth. "Hunger is a currency," he said. "Let us see who is rich." He brought with him a trick, a storm of scents that sharpened all wanting. Cinnamon and iron, grief and heat. The exact flavor of the thing you missed most before you knew to miss it. The town stirred in its sleep. 3 pale-eyed ones drifted toward easy doors. Your skin sang with need. It rose like a tide, like music you couldn't ignore. Lucian stood beside you, steady as a lighthouse. "Count with me," he said. "In for 4, out for 6. You did. The wanting did not leave. It shaped itself into something you could hold. You took the leather-bound book from your coat and opened it to the pressed violet. You read aloud the line you had memorized. "Not all hunger is for blood. Some is for witness." And then you witnessed. You stood in the churchyard and watched a boy on a bench decide not to text the person who would have used him. You stood by the storm drain and watched 2 shadows think better of a cruelty, because someone was listening. You watched Lucien, and he watched you. And wanting found another path. The elder frowned. His trick scent thinned like smoke after rain. "Hunger is still a currency," he said. "Then we are wealthy in patience," you answered. The elder left the way. Old things leave by becoming a rumor. You made a map together, not on paper, on the city itself. You placed care like lanterns. A baker who leaves a roll on the sill for the night guard, a teacher who keeps a spare umbrella by the door, a neighbor who knows which window latch sticks and oils it without asking. You placed words where they were needed. Welcome on a stoop that forgot. No on a staircase that collected badness. Home in a courtyard that wanted to be one. At the library, you left a note in the old book for whoever would find it next. If you are a door, you are not meant to be broken. If you are a key, you are not meant to be lost. If you are a room, you deserve windows. If you are none of these, you can be a house. You and Lucian became the house. People who never met you felt safer turning the last corner to their street. Dogs slept easier. The train miles away stopped sounding like a blade and started sounding like a story, moving on time. On a hot night that pretended to be cool, you walked past the gym. The steel door no longer fogged. Your reflection arrived with you, not behind you, and you waved to it like an old friend. "Do you miss the sun?" you asked Lucian. "I miss nothing," he said. "That would cost me you." You didn't answer, because it was all answer. The moon rose like a kept promise. The thresholds you kept hummed like well-tuned strings. Somewhere the radiator in the old stacks tapped 3 times. The room's way of saying present. You stood with Lucian at the edge of your town, your house without walls. "Listen," he said. You did. Beneath wind and road and rain and breath, the deep thrum of the place matched your own. Not possession, belonging. You were both immortal, and in love. A quiet, watchful love. The night draped itself across your shoulders like a trusted coat. You held the door. You kept the door. Nights were easy until they weren't. On the easy ones, you walked the perimeter and felt the town's low thrum meet your own and settle. On the hard ones, the thrum stepped away like a friend answering another call, and you had to stand closer to hear what avoided being heard. You learned every curb that dipped and every step that took 2 sounds to land. You learned which porch lights meant someone was still awake, and which meant the bulb had been dead for 3 days, but no one had admitted it to themselves yet. When it rained, the world aligned, rain made sense of edges, and offered timing to breath. 4 inches. 6 out. You carried that count in your pocket like a match. The first sign that something different was arriving came on a dry night in late spring when the radiator in the old stacks did not tap 3 times before the heat. It exhaled once, softly as though apologizing for what would follow, and then it kept its peace. The air smelled like paper that had remembered it used to be grass. You stood in the aisle where the leather-bound book waited and felt the quiet lean. It was the kind of quiet that forgets to blink. Lucian met you there, as if the quiet had delivered him. His eyes were the color of thought, not of night, and his face held the stillness he wore when he was listening on more levels than the room owned. There's this right? She say has put a hand to it. Where? He turned not toward the window or the door, but toward the floor. Underneath, he said, where the old river takes its time. You both knew the map under the map. You had walked it for years. Culverts like corridors, storm drains like round windows, the white-painted bridge with half its letters missing, like a sentence whose verb had gone on ahead. The seam ran through all of it, like a thought someone tried not to have. You moved through the library, down the service stairs that were not for the public but were for you, out into the alley where rain barrels usually talked in patient syllables. Tonight the barrels were quiet. The sky, stingy with water, gave you a brass moon. You did not need it. Your feet had learned the way. At the storm drain with the rust circle, you listened. Beneath the road, the river made a sound like memory being folded. The deep thrum that used to match your breath had shifted a tone, the way a voice breaks when someone tries to speak, while deciding if they should. Lucian lay his palm on the grate and closed his eyes. You breathed with him until the quiet deepened, and then you heard it. A second rhythm, not of the town, not of the natural dark, a countercurrent the size of patience being siphoned. Tax, he said, tasting the word as if it were an old coin left on the tongue. The elder? Or someone older, he said, or someone younger who learned from him. There are meetings you are invited to and meetings you are called to. The difference is whether you walk in with your own name or someone else's count. 2 nights later, you found a red thread tied around the library's side door handle. 3 turns, knotted like a decision. When you pulled it free, the leather-bound book shifted on its shelf. Between pages that should not have separated appeared a folded square of paper with a sigil you recognized from the book's spine, and from the place under your wrist that had begun to warm when thresholds needed you. The square unfolded itself the way a promise sometimes does. It said, Conclave. The word carried a chill and an old courtesy. You went because you belonged to the work more than to the hour, and because belonging is a kind of courage. The place was a basement not under any building you knew. You reached it by walking through 3 shadows in order. The shadow of the white bridge, the shadow of a door that never opened, the shadow of your own face on the library's back wall. Underneath, candles did the work of lesser moons. The room wore stone, and the smell of time unbothered by clocks. They were waiting, 5 with eyes you could not easily name. None like the elder who had come to tax you, none like Lucian exactly. One had a freckle at the corner of his eye that looked like a star out of place. One wore a wool coat with a tear on the sleeve from a century that didn't want to be recognized. One looked at you the way a mirror looks at someone who will not see themselves until they must. The one who spoke first introduced herself as garnets, which was either a name or a statement. We police nothing, she said. We remind, we witness. Sometimes when those fail, we bind. A rumor reached us that your town hums differently. Rumors are not currency. We are here for the ledger. Lucian's shoulders held history and ease. We keep thresholds, he said. We pay in patience. Patience is expensive, said the freckled one. Who funds you? Whoever knocks, you said, before you decided to. Garnet's mouth almost smiled. There have been houses before, she said. Most fell. The wind took them, or the hunger did, or the people who needed them left without learning to stay. Your elder visitor is not wrong that hunger functioned as exchange. When you disrupt exchange, you invite audit. She gestured and the air moved. You saw, as if projected upon the stone, a map of your town's underside. Lines brightened. The culverts, the drains, the rooms of still air where the old river sat with its back against stone and remembered being wider. At the white bridge, a lattice of influence pulsed. A net you had not woven. A net someone else was drawing tight. Who? You asked. Someone who loves order more than mercy, Garnet said. He believes thresholds should be toll roads. He has learned to make silence feel necessary. He calls himself Auditor. Lucian's jaw shifted. Order without witness is simply sleep given a badge. Then stay awake, said Garnet. But you must pass a fast. 30 nights without rain. 30 nights without the radiator's rhythm to help you count. If your house holds, we will recognize it. If it falls, we bind what remains so it cannot harm. We will not intervene unless the work becomes a war. Do you accept? There are answers that build themselves while your mouth is still deciding whether it belongs to you. We accept, you said. Lucian nodded with you, not after. The first night of the fast, the air turned crystalline. Leaves held their breath. The town's low thrum quieted until you could not have found it with a microscope. People grew sharp around their edges. They walked faster, not to arrive sooner, but because standing still made them aware of the shape of their want. You and Lucien had prepared. You had cached small comforts where you knew hands would reach without knowing you had placed them. An umbrella at the corner where the bus always ran 5 minutes late. A thermos of sweet tea on the stoop of the building whose door needed a hip to open. Hand warmers in a tin near the train platform where wind made decisions for bones. None of it was magic. All of it worked. On the 7th night, reflections began to thin. It wasn't dramatic. Mirrors still showed faces, but if someone looked too long, their image tired before they did and sat down. In the grocery's freezer glass, a woman's face did not look up when she did. In the gym's metal door, new handle, no fog, the oval of a breath appeared that did not belong to anyone standing there. You touched the metal and felt it cool, not because it lacked heat, but because something was collecting it. The auditor's net was not only under the bridge, it had learned the town's habit of looking at itself to know it was still itself and had placed a hand there. This is the mirror famine, Lucian said. We'll lose people to their own absence if we let it run. What stops it? Witness, he said, and he looked at you as if remembering something that had not yet happened. You took chalk and made small circles on thresholds that forgot they were thresholds. The step no one noticed was cracked, the railing whose paint remembered too many hands. You stood across from the bus shelter, where once a pale-eyed woman had watched you, and you greeted every person who avoided their reflection in the glass. You said their name when you knew it, and a truthful adjective when you didn't. You said, present. You said, I see you. You did not say, Dawan, do not be afraid. You let them feel what they felt and watched with them until the feeling passed through. Not all hunger is for blood. Some is for witness. The town began to answer in small ways. A neighbor returned a borrowed hammer that had lived under his sink for 6 months. A boy in a blue jacket tied an errant shoelace for a stranger because he remembered someone had once done it for him. The baker put 2 rolls on the sill instead of 1. The mirror hunger found less to feed on. The auditor's net did not loosen, but it could no longer draw so fast. On the 14th night, your hand marked itself. It happened while you were counting children at a crosswalk whose light had decided not to believe in green. You felt heat beneath your wrist bone and then a coolness like stone near water. When you lifted your palm, the sigil from the book's spine showed faintly. No cut, no ink, only the impression left by consent. The lines were simple: a doorway, a key, a square, like a room, and a 4th shape that looked like a hinge. It warmed when someone nearby needed their name said, or their breath counted with, or their door held while they decided whether to walk through. It cooled when a threshold could keep itself. Lucian saw it and closed his fingers around yours as if to keep it from slipping away. His eyes found you with the relief of a traveler seeing a landmark before the road takes another turn. "Housekeeper," he said, and it was not a job title. It was a truth. The auditor arrived in a manner that meant to be polite. He stepped out of a sedan so average it vanished while parked. He wore a suit that forgot it had been pressed and a tie the color of compromise. He could have been anyone's neighbor who never borrowed anything and never waved when he mowed at dusk. His face was precise without being memorable. Only his eyes betrayed him. They did not blink on the beat the world kept. He came to the old stacks on night a night that did not expect guests, and stood with his hands clasped like 2 receipts. "You have made an unregulated house," he said, not looking at the books. "Houses collapse. I prevent mess." "Good evening," you said, because love is a house, and houses have doors, and doors have manners. "We are occupied." He did not smile. "Thresholds accumulate cost," he said. "Witness accrues interest. Compassion depreciates when misallocated. I will assess." Lucian's voice was patient the way stones are patient when rivers try to teach them. "The last auditor believed hunger was a currency," he said. "We are wealthy in patience. We retired his claim." "Ah," said auditor, and his eyes blinked 3 times too quickly. "You mistake a policy change for a principle. This is not a negotiation." He reached into the air as if pulling down a cord on a bus, and the thrum hiccuped in your bones. Somewhere, a baby stopped crying too abruptly. Somewhere else, a door that should have been hard to open yielded to a hand that did not own it. The net tightened. You did not raise your voice. You said, "Leave our hinges. We'll take the debt." "Debt is a habit," auditor said. "It will own you." "Only if we stop paying," you said. "Stay and watch the ledger, or go and make a rumor that truth will undo. Either way, we'll keep the door." It is a strange thing to watch someone who believes in numbers miscount what matters. Auditor set his teeth around the work and tried to starve your town of reflection, of rain, of witness. He went after small things because small things hold more than they look like. He made neighbors forget what time trash went out, then grew them irritated at one another, then hung their irritation like wet clothes on lines between houses. He made the traffic light pause for a breath too long in 3 places, then recorded the way drivers' hands tightened around steering wheels and called it data. He charted every apology swallowed before it reached a mouth, then weighted that measure against kindness given without evidence. The ledger he kept went crooked because he did not count laughter that did not ask to be noticed. You and Lucian made your own ledger, not with numbers but with presence. You sat in the churchyard 5 nights in a row and watched the man who always came and never stayed long. You did not interrupt his grief. You learned its perimeter and held it with him at the edges. You walked with the night guard while he did his rounds, and he told you a joke he had been saving for someone who could carry it. You returned a library book 2 decades overdue and paid the fine in a currency older than money. A confession to the room you whispered under breath that the book had kept you company when you thought you would not manage to be a person. The room forgave you. The radiator, still on strike, made one small tap, as if native speech had returned for a moment to the mouth that missed it. On the 21st night, wind forgot the town on purpose. Flags hung like sentences with no verbs, and your breath felt like it belonged to another room. The thrum was not merely quiet, it was elsewhere. The white bridge of Chubikiriyo and Nani, Omwarsher, Nyarishukitori and Sol. Chad Chi Tree, E Jasari Shirio, Y, Iwi, Error Sharbichari E, you tolerated your work even as it kept its lost letters to itself, gave a single groan that meant, in bridge language, I am not being held from the right direction. You and Lucian went there and found the net. It looked like nothing. That was how you knew what it was. The absence had shape. It raised the hair on your arms. It reached over the water, into the water, under it, and up onto land, touching thresholds the way a thief touches the tops of doors for spare keys. Lucian said, he wants stillness to do his work. Then we move, you said, and you stepped to the center of the bridge where the missing letters made the town's name into an unword. You stood where something else wanted to stand. Lucian stood to your left and to your right without moving, the way he always had. He began to count your breath with you, 4 in, 6 out, and then began to speak the names of places that belonged to your keeping. He said the storm drain's corner where the rust circle was a halo. He said the alley behind the bakery that smelled like relief. He said the elevator that always caught at the second floor, not because it was broken, but because it liked making people stand near one another long enough to exchange a sentence. Every name he spoke reached into the net and made a lace of what had been a mesh. You added your own names. You said the classroom where Mr. Patel had talked about empires while a life you had not expected to have introduced itself. You said the gym corridor where the clock had paused with you at 3:13 and then learned to move again. You said the stacks and the violet pressed on a page that had outlasted weather, policy, and proprietors. You said people's names too when you knew them and had permission to speak them out loud. The net did not break. It learned to be generous under the weight of naming. On the 24th night, rain tried to come and thought better of it. The clouds did their best impression of stone. Children grew loud at bedtime because all that living had nowhere to go. The mirror famine faltered. People had begun to look at one another instead of only at themselves, and the absence could not eat what had already been shared. You felt your mark warm whenever someone told the truth, and then stayed to listen to how it landed. Garnet came to you as the night turned its face toward morning, without committing to it. She had taken off the coat. Her hands were bare. He will try one last thing, she said. He will give the town a day without wind. He will make sound a stranger. If the thrum cannot return to itself, the house will fail. How do we hold it? You asked. You do not, she said. You invite others too. She looked at you the way a key looks at a lock it has not tried yet. No house stays by the will of its keepers. It stays if it is worth being kept by many. The day without wind arrived like a held breath an entire place had agreed upon without writing it down. Leaves hardened around their edges and refused to speak. Dogs lifted their heads and decided not to warn. People's footsteps made no sound on stairs. Even silence needed something else to measure itself against. Today, it measured itself against itself and grew heavy. The thrum was absent, the way a heart is absent from a stone. You wrote a note. You made 100 of them. You left them under doormats, on cafe counters, tucked into free box books. You did not sign them. You did not explain. Each read, at noon, hum the lowest note you can. Hold it for a breath. Stop. Then do it again. If someone is beside you, hum with them. No one owed you anything, but the town liked being asked in ways that kept dignity upright. At noon, a mechanic in an open bay looked at the note and at his hands and at the sky that had forgotten how to be sky. He hummed. It was not a beautiful sound, but it was honest. Across the street, a woman waiting for a bus lowered her eyes and hummed too. On a fourth floor, a retired teacher placed his chalkboard eraser on the windowsill and hummed, as if he were reminding the room how to contain a lesson. In the library, the radiator remembered its language and tapped once, then twice, then 3 times. The sound was small and sufficient. The thrum did not so much return as recognize its name and incline toward it. Auditor appeared on the bridge, because of course he did. He looked thinner, which was odd in a man whose body had never seemed one thing or another. "This is against policy," he said, but the sentence had lost its teeth. "You cannot just ask a town to hold itself." "You can," you said, not triumphantly, simply as if pointing out water to someone who had learned to disbelieve it. "You can ask and it will decide whether to say yes." Lucian stepped forward just enough that the space knew he intended it. "You built a net to catch what you do not own," he said. "We made a lace to let the world pass through itself and stay itself." Auditor put a hand on the railing where hands had touched for 100 years. He felt, perhaps for the first time, the wear of care instead of the absence of it. "You will make a mess," he said, but it sounded like a memory of himself, saying it to someone who had not needed to hear. He blinked, finally, on the world's beat. Then he did the strangest thing. He reached into his pocket and produced a folded sheet of paper with a long column of numbers. He tore it carefully in half and then into quarters. The pieces made no sound when they left his hands. "Ledger closed," he said, as if granting himself permission not to continue. With the politeness of a man leaving a party he had not enjoyed, he walked away until he blended into a story where he had never been the antagonist, only a man who loved lines too much. The conclave returned on the 30th night. Garnet did not ask for proof. Proof had unfolded in 100 small pockets of continued life. She touched your marked wrist with a finger as cold as a lake at morning and said, "How's..." She looked at Lucien as if he were the hinge itself and said, "Keeper." The freckled one bowed with a gracelessness that made you like him more. "It will not always be this kind," he said. "There will be winters, even in summer. But you have made something weather-worthy." "What now?" you asked, because work does not end, it changes shape. "You keep," Garnet said, "and you teach others to keep, so that if you must sleep, the house does not." She handed you a new page for the leather-bound book. It had waited, empty, for your words. Across the top, the usual script had been replaced by a simpler hand. "A house is not a cage." Below that, space. You did not fill it right away. You let days do their learning. You walked the routes you knew and added new ones. The bike path along the river, where teenagers tried on versions of their names and needed someone to know they had done it. The clinic's parking lot, where fear made people impatient with time, and you sat with them so the clock did not have to carry it alone. The alley where a stray cat lived under a leaning pallet and accepted food as if grace were an accident to be tolerated. You found 3 new doorways, a laundromat whose machines sang in triads when left to run after midnight, a stairwell that smelled like oranges because someone always peeled one there before climbing home, a bench under a slow tree where goodbyes were discontinued and hellos had been too shy to begin. You marked them lightly, not to claim, only to remind. That winter, snow refused drama. It arrived in equal portions and let roofs take turns. The town aged in ways you could hold. A mural that had once been bright now became a lesson in good fading. A bakery changed hands and did not lose the recipes that kept grief's hands busy. Mr. Patel, who had once retired, returned to the school as a substitute when the world needed more bodies where minds were growing. He did not teach empire anymore. He taught the shape of questions. In the stacks, the leather-bound book softened. You wrote on the page Garnet had given you, "If you are a door, you are not meant to be broken. If you are a key, you are not meant to be lost. If you are a room, you deserve windows. If you are none of these, you can be a house." Then you added what had become your work's finest thread. "If you are a house, let your hinges be witness." Lucien read it and waited the way he did when he knew a word was still arriving from a long way off. You thought it was his word to speak. It turned out to be yours. "Stay," you said to him, and to the work, and to yourself. In the year, you had walls. You had once thought you might not survive. He smiled the smile that moved like sunrise behind clouds, the one he did not spend often, the one he kept the way a person keeps a promise they love keeping. "Always," he said, and it did not sound like a claim. It sounded like the weather. Years turned again. People you had watched become persons in full grew older in the ways that make faces more interesting. The White Bridge had its letters replaced by a city initiative, which meant the sign company installed them wrong for a week before someone whose grandparent had told them the right name walked down with a screwdriver and corrected it. The storm drain's rust circle thickened and then thinned and finally wore away under your palm as if one material had agreed to become another. The radiator in the stacks grew a new rattle and the maintenance log learned to listen. The leather-bound book added weight without adding pages. Trouble returned because not all nets are cast by auditors. Once, a rumor arrived that promised to make loneliness cost less if people would sign for their neighbor's attention, like packages. Once, a man with pale eyes tried to sell a town square a story about itself that was too easy to be true. Once, a child was a door and did not know it yet, and someone who hunted went the way some people hunt excuses, smelled the hinge, and came running. You held in all three cases. You kept names on their own tongues, you returned the story to its owner, and asked who else it could include. You sat on the curb with the child and counted leaves until the hunter bored of patience and walked into a night that no longer fed him. You and Lucien learned to rest without abandoning. It is the only way the long work survives the long. You slept beneath the earth some seasons with moonlight pressed through crystal and water writing patient sentences near your feet. You rose when the town exhaled and needed the next thing. When you kissed, it was not to confirm what you had. It was because the day had offered you a corner of itself, and you knew to put a blessing there. One afternoon, years later, rain came in sideways and decided to stay. You visited the history classroom. It was no longer that. The school had turned it into a lab with tables that lifted and sinks that gave water politely. On the far wall, the old map hung in a frame as a courtesy to memory, its edges still curled, though the glass asked them not to. You stood by the window, and the glass did what glass does when it has learned about you. It let your reflection arrive on time. You lifted a piece of chalk you had brought in your coat, the chalk Mr. Patel's eraser had once held the ghost of, and you wrote small in the corner of the board. I notice. It was nothing and everything. Later, some student would find the word and try it on and take it somewhere you would never see. That is how keeping works when it is working. In the stacks, the violet had darkened to the color of night through wine. The page held it without complaint. Beside the old lines, someone else, maybe the mechanic, maybe the teacher, maybe a stranger who had only stayed 1 week and still belonged, had added a sentence in a different hand. The house keeps because the world keeps it back. You ran your finger under the words and felt the paper warm as if held a long time. On a rooftop where Dawn tried the edge and found it still good, Lucien leaned his shoulder to yours. The town below hummed in its right key. The deep thrum you had once had to coax now came the way breath does when no one is watching. He said, "There will be Thursdays again," and you did not need to say yes. The day spread out, a patient map of thresholds you had learned to keep and thresholds you had not yet met. You held the door. The door held, and when the rain started again, it sounded like a language you knew by heart.